Well, let's cross live now to Lyal Sunga, visiting professor at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. Thanks for joining us today on RT, sir. Do you think this latest warning from UN investigators will have any effect at all on the US-led coalition and their operations?
Well, I think it's important for them to state the principle. It's an important principle, and that is, often the parties, the fighting parties, know the rules and customs, the laws and customs of war, but it's very important that the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Syria remind the fighting parties that of their obligations under international humanitarian law. One of those obligations is to take great care in distinguishing between civilians and combatants, and especially in this particular phase of the Raqqa campaign, where you're after 2 years when the ISIS had taken Raqqa and also on the Iraq side Mosul, and proclaimed them as basically the capital cities of the caliphate, and trying to build their legitimacy on that basis, territorial basis. It's very important at this phase that in the last few months, where ISIS has been losing a lot of territory and the coalition is gaining an upper hand, that with all the excitement and the pressure at this stage, that they take great care not to sacrifice the well-being of civilians. And I think that the words of the Commission of Inquiry serve as a very useful reminder, and of all other parties that pronounce upon it, such as Human Rights Watch has already pointed out. Many news agencies, such as yours, are warning the parties, do follow international humanitarian law. It gets very exciting for commanders at this stage, that when they've got the upper hand, and we may be nearing it's too early to say, but a final phase, or at least a decisive phase in the Raqqa campaign, not to just go all out to the point that civilians are sacrificed, because they're already in the middle of they're in harm's way, and so great care has to be taken.
We know that there's casualties in any aerial campaign, coalition, Syrian, Russian, etc. But, I mean, do you think it's possible to take any city without civilian casualties? Could casualties have been avoided?
You know, it's not that civilian casualties can be completely avoided. And international humanitarian law, as spelt out in the Geneva Conventions and protocols and in customary international law, has always recognized that military campaigns inevitably, almost always, involve some civilian deaths, so-called euphemistically collateral damage. Long gone are the days when soldiers met in faraway fields away from civilian centers. And the modern face of conflict is very much one that puts civilians in harm's way. So it's not that no civilian casualties should be, that should be the ultimate, of course, an aim, but that would be unrealistic. The obligations under international humanitarian law are not to use force beyond what is proportional and what is necessary to gain control of the military objective, to meet the valid military objective. So a campaign, for example, that we've heard reports that white phosphorus is being used. That's a chemical that burns at 800 degrees Celsius, burns right to the bone. You can use it for signaling or for marking the way, but if it's used indiscriminately and hits civilians, or even the combatants whom we are fighting, this causes unnecessary suffering, which is contrary to the spirit and the norms of international humanitarian law. So it's to minimize casualties to the degree possible, to make sure that war is humanized as much as possible.
I'd just like to jump in, if I may. Sorry to interrupt, so I just want to get as many questions as I can in before we run out of time. Just looking to the future now, do you think we'll ever see any sort of independent investigation or tribunal over the events in Syria where all sides of this civil war will be able to present their version of what happened, or at least their point of view?
Let's hope that that can happen, because you never know. I mean, several resolutions, draft resolutions before the Security Council to refer the situation to the International Criminal Court were vetoed. And that's unfortunate. But there could be other modes of enforcing individual criminal responsibility at some future time. We have yet to see whether there will be a change of government and some possibilities for transitional justice, or some tribunals, or even now there are military courts that are operating regularly in countries, and many of the foreign fighters that are involved in this conflict and in neighboring Iraq could be prosecuted for war crimes or for crimes against humanity, as well as coalition forces or forces on whatever side. So whomever commits serious violations of the laws and customs of war or the grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions can be prosecuted under national courts or under a tribunal that could be set up, or eventually even in the International Criminal Court if it is conferred jurisdiction to take jurisdiction over the situation in Syria.
All right, Lyal Sunga, visiting professor at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. Thanks so much for joining us and giving us your expert insight today on the programme.
You're very much welcome. Thank you. Thank you for